the report for being received. Alison, are there any last minute issues that you wanted to verbally advise to the committee before we go into any questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have questions? Okay. Probably an obvious question, Alison. The only question I had was in relation to geopolitical events. I assume that they create no greater impact on the budget to 30 June.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, we are seeing some cost increases, but suspect that's probably more to do with supply chain issues, contractor shortages, etc., affected by COVID, not having all your resources on deck. But we're not reforecasting budgets because there will be an element of the work program that we won't be able to address in this financial year, so it won't have a detrimental effect on the financials.
Okay, thank you. And just more widely, no, you're not seeing any material risk increases as a result of these geopolitical events, leaving aside the issue of finance that you've just addressed?
No, so it'll come through. It'll be something that affects the nation as a whole rather than our district specifically.
Okay, that's really helpful. Any other colleagues have any questions for Alison? Okay, so we're going to take that report as having been read and received. Thank you, Alison. Turning now to the Strategic Risk Register and Emerging Risks report, and the recommendation here is that we note the updated risk appetite statement and risk register. Before we go to questions, Kelly, welcome. Are there any additions that you want to make verbally before we go to colleagues for questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Just one change to the report is just noted in item 5, part 5, we recruited a new risk advisor. They have a revised start date of the 7th of April, so they start with us at council tomorrow. And could it please be noted in the minutes, there's a spelling error in his last name, and it's Tisdall, so I'll get in touch with Gayleen just to note that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Do any colleagues have any questions in relation to this report? I just had, Councillor Sedgwick.
Councillor Beck was ahead of me and I was just looking for my hand, sorry.
I apologise, Councillor Beck, I have lost you in the melee.
And he has an odd-coloured hand, I have to say.
I beg your pardon, your hand got lost in your wallpaper, Councillor Beck. Right, forgive me. You're first. Go ahead.
Councillor Sedgwick has made a similar comment before. Yeah, I'm just trying to, I guess, link this paper to the previous one, and maybe they don't link. But some of those, risks that that I outlined in Alison's paper around, three waters and the model that's there, the inflationary pressures, which partly picked up on here. I'm just wondering whether that whole government reform bit feeds into your paper at all, Kelly. We've got significant, we know we've got a lot of work as we try to respond to the various policy statements and policy directions that are out. I'm just wondering, and Alison addresses those in her paper, I'm just wondering if they somehow feed through to here, other than possibly in this point 2 inflationary pressure, but I would have thought it's bigger than that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Beck. So the reforms were in the previous report, and when I was writing this report, I didn't have any current updates for that reform, so I've just put the most up-to-date emerging risks that I had information for. But as the reform information comes through further, that will be included in the report.
Would it be fair to say, though, that this actually remains fairly large on our radar by the impact it could have across a range of those initiatives.
Yes, I'll note that and include that more regularly in the report.
So, Councillor, I thought your point's a really good one. I just wondered, when I look at the risk appetite statement itself, the references to political and strategic do indicate that a dial that's in high. So
it's really interesting, isn't it? It actually doesn't matter what our appetite is. we're being forced a meal, force fed a meal, whether we like it or not. Appetite notwithstanding, but yeah, I'm happy that that's been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sedgwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question relates to inflationary pressure, and I think it probably is endemic right across the board for everybody. Where we talk about rates postponed and remission, I understand that. Understand we've had them forever. I'm interested to know, has that number of inquiries and barriers moved, and what is the effect on us, and has it affected our appetite for this as a risk?
Sorry, I can't answer that one. It
feels like an Alison question to me.
Sorry, I'm just trying to see whether Colin might have some up-to-date information around the number of queries and whether it is any different to a normal year. Sorry, Colin, to put you on.
No, that's fine. I'm here. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. In terms of our rate remission requests, it's no different to any previous year. It's not higher at all. What we are seeing, though, is an increase in the number of rate rebate applications. So it's at that level that we're seeing a change, but certainly not in terms of remissions.
Okay, we monitor that, yes.
Yeah, so having said that, though, we are seeing an increase in the value of penalties that we're charging. So payments are probably a little bit behind where they would be last year in terms of if we use the penalties charged as a guide, and our excellent payment history remissions on those penalties is also higher than previous years. So we're seeing people that are not paying their installments, people who have previously been really good payers are now not paying their installments on time.
Thank you.
Okay.
As I suspect, thank you.
Great question, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Church.
Thank you, through the chair. I have two parts, one on page 34 and one on page 38. The one on page 34 is around the zero harm for people. And I note that we've got it at low, which I understand the concept of that. But we've also been in workshops with the whole of council around, we want 0 for 0, that we have no appetite. So I'm kind of feeling conflicted between my recollection of our workshopping in this is that we actually have an appetite of 0 harm and all risk. But I just want to clarify the risk assessment at being low rather than at 0. If someone can help me, that would be good.
I think if I can help, Councillor Church, it's a conversation that we've had a number of times. And I think we have actually had the dial on 0 in the past, and we've actually moved it because, yes, our aspiration is absolutely for it to be 0, but from a practical perspective, you know, it's about what's actually achievable. But so our risk appetite is very low, but yeah, not possible to be 0.
Well, then I guess my follow-on to that would be the last sentence of the appetite statement: we aspire to be better than good enough is not strong enough. If we, you know, in an ideal world that we want 0 tolerance for around health and safety, then I think we need to actually make that part of the story and add it to that story culture.
Right. Yeah, because I think if we had a zero appetite, Councillor Church, no one would do anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. But if we're saying that we it's in an ideal world, then part of that conversation, the story should be to explain the difference.
Okay.
And that so it's still that aspirational vision, right?
Yeah.
And we're moving along that. We're not sophisticated as council to be. I think last time I recall a rating of our zero health and safety was around 6 out of 10, 6 or 7, moving forward and improving as an organisation. So I think it links completely back into that. There's when we're at 8 or 9, which I think we're going to rapidly with all the work that's been done. Then these aspirational things become more important. So I think it's still an overall vision. But that's just my comment around.
Okay. All right. We'll try and catch that sentiment better.
So Councillor Church, thank you for that comment. I think that the point you're making is a good one, which is that we can always do better in terms of communicating our aspirations in relation to zero harm. And I note that we've got a couple of papers in a very short while next to talk about in relation to that very issue. So thank you. Your comments are a really good one. Councillor, you had a second question.
Yes. On page 38, there was about affordability and community expectations. When I look at so that's halfway down page 38.
Yep.
So when I look at where we started on affordability and those conversations, and also community expectations and how it's morphed to the description in 2022, I'm kind of concerned that it's moved away from the original ideas of them. And I mean, even for example, with the community expectations, which really those two things started around delivery of infrastructure, the affordability, say, of how we provide services to council and what level of service we can provide at what cost and rates, and a segue of affordability of services. That was kind of where it started in the conversation back in 21. It seems to have morphed quite a lot from that movement of affordability. We just discussed rates and the economic environment. The community expectations was really around we as an organisation have to deliver infrastructure and capital projects on a LTP, which we engage with. And really, it seemed to have morphed in the description to like a want of it's moved away from that to a misalignment between community wants and the viability of delivering those wants. See, to me, the need wants is actually kind of quite a long way from where it is, because we actually have an obligation to deliver an operational LTP as council. That's my understanding of what we're doing. And that really puts it back onto not how we can manage those expectations and delivery of, and if there's issues around those deliveries like COVID, how we then manage that from a communication strategy, etc., which is again discussed later on. But just to segue it to being community wants really infers a whole lot of other things, like being council being Santa Claus and we can't be that, which I think is quite a long way from where we started. Now, they may be, and I know that we want to reduce these amount of these risk registers, and it may be that these two can be encapsulated into the and around the growth more, but I think we've moved away from those intents quite a lot, or even just the words wants, for example.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I know that we have Kat on the call as a special guest today. Wonder whether she helped us pull this stuff together, whether she might have a comment.
Hi, thanks for having me back today. So just to clarify on that, Councillor Church, through you, Chair, what we've got reflected here is the conversation that came out of the workshop. So we do look that every year things are going to change. There are going to be like changes about like direction depending on what's happening within, you know, the district, what's happening nationally. I think when we look at that community expectations risk now, as it's now written, it is probably more about, you know, what the community expects, like, you know, what they think we should be providing, as opposed to what's being provided and confirmed through the long-term plan. So some of the other risks actually encapsulate that. So if you look at the affordability risk, which now speaks about, us being able to provide the infrastructure and services, that's more around those commitments through the long-term plan, whereas the community expectations is around, what they might think that we're supposed to do outside of that, and having to have those hard conversations with them. Because we know that the interconnection between community expectations and affordability sometimes has quite a large gap. And it's how do we communicate with them to help them to understand that to deliver, our infrastructure and everything that's included in the long-term plan, the community may have other wants and that they think should be met, but our priority still sits with those agreements that we've made in the long-term plan. And so that's where it sort of falls into why it's written around the public scrutiny. And the affordability and some of the other ones in there actually capture those other commitments that have been made.
Right. Yeah, I guess the words like capital projects, infrastructure, and LTP, because they are consulted in legislative processes and things that we segue against, then I just think they're not strong enough statements, because it's wants against what. Okay, so yeah, but I made my concerns, but I don't think they're strong enough and clear enough from where they started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think thanks, Councillor. I think that's we'll note your concern. All right. On that basis, I just have one question for you, Kelly, at page 27. And hopefully colleagues will forgive me for asking what may be an extraordinarily stupid question. You say council will utilise a floating line methodology where necessary to respond to these impacts. That sounds very dreamy. What is a floating line methodology?
Kelly, would you like me to take that?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Alison. I did make sure I was able to explain it in a way that might be understandable, but I think you can probably...
Actually, so you take it then, because I'll like...
Or we could just ask our special guest to explain it herself, but it would be nice to hear the answer.
Yeah. So a floating line concept is basically we have an overall budget and we have priorities within that budget. So we have individual projects that say, so if you've got a renewal program of works, these are the ones that need to be done. Their risk profile is higher, their priority is higher. We would actually, so if the top project comes in and it's more expensive than the budget we've allowed for, then actually it might push one of the other ones on the list that is lower in priority into being the top project for the following year. So it just changes, it just cascades the years in which it may be achieved based on financial constraints.
Okay, thank you. All right, with apologies to everyone for playing catch up. Right, so I think that takes care of the strategic risk register and emerging risk report. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kat. Turning now to a brace of papers on zero harm. We've got a paper from Lynn on zero harm safety management system review, and then a paper from Kat on safety management system audit 2021. And then we've got, we'll deal subsequently with the zero harm report. Lynn, shall we start by just asking you whether there's anything in particular that you wanted to add to this paper before we get into a discussion? I'm going to ask Kat the same thing, because in an ideal world, I would have liked to have seen these integrated. So I'm going to take these papers as a brace, and we'll try and get an overarching sense of what I certainly found was a welter of numbers. So, Lynn, is there anything that you'd like to kick off with? And I'll ask Kat the same question.
So good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. I guess the only thing that I'd like to say is, you know, obviously the key points from the management review are laid out in the executive summary, and just bearing in mind that this is the second time that we have done a management system review in line with the 45,001 standard. So it has been a learning opportunity And I guess the key thing is the management review was presented to ELT last week, and they were supportive of the findings of the management review. And I think the key recommendation is basically around the timing of it, that I would be proposing to both this committee and the ELT that we move the timing of it to probably March, so just before the end of the financial year, as it then may inform our planning for the subsequent financial year.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. So, Kat, I'm going to ask you the same question, and then we're going to get into an opportunity for colleagues to ask questions. Kat, your paper.
So the only two things that I'd like to point out, because Lynn's covered some of it with her explanations there, are that this was the first audit of the 45,001. So it's actually set a benchmark for how future audits will be done. And one of the outcomes from that audit, I guess, or one of the comments that was made by the auditors was that the system is extremely comprehensive in its current state, and it's obvious that a lot of work's already gone into it. And so, and already the Zero Harm team are working towards delivering a lot of the recommendations that were in there, and so it stays on track from a risk perspective. The delivery of those outcomes are on track with the current plan.
Okay, so just before we get into questions from colleagues, in the staff recommendations of your paper, there's a reference to recommendations being included in the Zero Harm Framework Review. I couldn't find any recommendations in that paper.
My understanding is that that is going forward. The audit recommendations will be included in that review. So as you said, you'd prefer everything to be in a single paper. So going forward, one of the outcomes and one of the requirements of the audit is that an audit should be done annually or periodically. So and that going forward, those will be included in the review. So there won't be two papers going forward.
Oh, so I beg your pardon. For the purpose of clarification, what you really mean is that we note that in future recommendations be included in the Zero Harm Framework Review. Right. I wonder whether, Galen, our minutes can reflect that clarification, because I think you and I were both confused. I was furiously looking for recommendations and couldn't find them and didn't realise we were talking about a future state. So I apologise to colleagues if I was the only person stupid enough to not understand that, but thank you for that clarification. All right, so colleagues, any questions for either Lynn or Kat on their papers? Starting with Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you. And Lynn, this might be a silly question, so I apologise in advance if it turns out to be. I was just interested in zooming out a little bit. But what is it that did we in effect have a system we developed ourselves and then moved to this new standard, or were we working under a different standard before? In which case, what does the standard hope to achieve compared to the one we were previously on?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so previously, before I came to council, you had in place the ACC Workplace Safety Management Program, which was an external audit by ACC, which gave you a discount off your ACC levies of either 5, 10 or 15% based on your audit result. That audit standard was based on an Australian New Zealand Health and Safety Management System standard of 4801. 4801 has now been superseded. Well, it was superseded by a EU standard or a British standard, and then it's now been superseded by 45,001. So it's the first international health and safety management system standard. So essentially we're moving to what's seen as best practice in terms of managing health and safety. So I guess it's an evolution of standards. And now 4801 has been, I guess, replaced in New Zealand. The Australian-New Zealand Standards Committee has adopted the ISO 45000 standard, and it's now called ASNZS 45001. So I guess in a nutshell, we've evolved.
Yeah, and look, I get that. And the ISO system has now been around, 30 years or something.
Yeah.
Is there any particular things that the standards, you describe it as international best practice, so other than a standardization, I guess, are there other elements that this particular standard seeks to raise above, in terms of priority or areas of foci compared to where we came from?
It does have more of a focus on risk and risk management. It is more holistic than 4801, and then it talks about the organisation understanding the context in which it operates and risks that could impact health and safety both internally and externally to the organisation. So it's much broader in its, I guess, approach, therefore giving you a much better result in terms of managing safety.
And given our general approach to risk, it would seem like a good fit, a good alignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sedgwick.
Thank you. Again, I may not be reading this as accurately as I should, but I'm looking at page 54 and the summary table of audit outcomes, and
recording in progress.
Sorry, Councillor, carry on.
I think that was Mr. Whitaker objecting. And there's a line in there which really concerns me, but I'm sure that there is an explanation for it. I hope there's an explanation. At the time of the audit, with the evidence presented, it could not be demonstrated that top management has taken overall responsibility or accountability. And I see you have some mitigations, but it sounds like we need some really active mitigations, not passive. Please read this in your spare time with your cup of tea. If it's not being accountable, the talk walked at the top, where are we? So please tell me that this is not what I'm reading.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can take that one. Might need some support from Lynn on this also though. So the process of the audit, and I guess that's why this initial audit report is a separate report. It talks through the actual process of the audit. And one of the items, and we have one of the auditors here as well, so if she needs to step in, I'll ask for her assistance. But when the audits are undertaken, the person who's being interviewed or the activities that are being reviewed or watched, or the documentation that's requested may not, for whatever reason, be able to be presented at that particular time. So it is a snapshot. It's not a conclusive evidence that something isn't happening or that doesn't exist. So, and as a learning process, we also need to understand what we need to be able to produce and what the requirements are through the audit. So there's an audit checklist that's used. So on this particular one, you can see there's some commentary there provided by Lynn and some action in there provided to help to, I guess, clarify this and ensure that subsequent audits and as a actionable item, we are able to provide that, I guess, level of assurance to the auditors. Yeah, so at the time of the audit, they weren't able to determine that top management had those particular responsibilities. So the Zero Harm manager has said that a single document will be created, which will explicitly outline top management's roles, but included in the commentary there, it does discuss about how top management demonstrates their commitment. And that to try to make that a little bit clearer, that action will be put into place quite soon. Lynn, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. So through you, Ms. Chair, with what you've said, Kat, I think it was, obviously this audit was a learning process for all of us, and sometimes too it's around interpretation of the question as well. So we've since met on this particular action and just sort of understand like how we can present the evidence to be more tell the story much easier for the auditors, but also how we could potentially create a document that anybody coming into the business can clearly see who's responsible for what, because at the moment it's kind of scattered everywhere. So what we're talking about, and in some respects, it does need to be segmented when we're talking about specific critical risk, but what we're talking about, or what we've agreed to, is putting in our safety management system a clear document that sort of says, regardless of the level that you sit within the business, and in particular top management, these are the responsibilities that you have in relation to health and safety. So just crystallizing it.
I guess what I'm hearing, if you boil it all down, is the audit's done its job. It's identified an issue.
Yeah.
Much better for us to identify issues internally than externally. And we're dealing with the issue. So I think in that respect, great question, but I think that's the benefit of having an audit. Councillor Church, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Just to go back to one of your comments, I also found I got a bit drowned in trying to navigate all of the numbers and facts. Like I like to understand some underlying issues so I can better extrapolate my thoughts, for sure. I did feel a bit drowned, so I like the tables a bit better than some of the words when there's lots of numbers, especially around the ISO. But yeah, thank you. But my question is actually, it's two accolades. It's what I want to formally do. It's on page 52, on the middle of page 52, the auditors comment that the ZHSMS acronym, lovely, is a comprehensive system and it's evident that the significant work has been done to achieve its current condition. So I think that's really great, and I could just like to acknowledge that work that's gone in from staff, because I always feel like sometimes my questions are more critiquing, but I really like to acknowledge the work that's gone into that moving target that we've got. And the same really is on page 64, the top of the dashboard. And it's a consistent thing that comes up is really just to acknowledge the customer service business unit around health and safety, and they seem to be, for whatever reasons, continually active and quite consistent in their reporting and navigating and near missing and things like that. So just like to acknowledge, that we are making a lot of progress, and lots of people are doing really good work, and particularly in our business units. So, and really to the people on here now.
Well said, Councillor. Thank you very much. If I could just ask a couple of questions and maybe join Councillor Beck in the helicopter. Lynn, how many people work in the Zero Harm team?
So currently, Mr. Chair, we have 3.
Okay. And does the Zero Harm team have a vision and a purpose?
Yes.
Great. Would you mind sending that through to me after the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
No hurry, but I'd love to see it. And then finally, there's this sentence at page 44 that there are 62 controls dealing with working with dangerous animals. Are we saying, because this goes to one of the overriding concerns I have about this area is the complexity that we seem to have built. Are we saying that the people who work with dangerous animals know and understand every one of those 62 controls?
So sorry, what page?
Page 44.
44.
While you're looking, I mean, I grew up on a farm and we only had one control for working with dangerous animals.
Yep. So I think it's important to, I guess, talk about the structure of a bow tie now, if that's okay. Some of the controls sit at an organisational level and some of them sit at an operational level. So when I say organisational, that might be like, for example, having a system in place to identify training needs for new staff and a process for delivering the training. So some of those 62 controls don't influence like that they don't need to be known by the staff on the ground day to day, but they provide a structure at an organizational level for managing the risk. Does that help answer
It does.
your question?
It does help me. Thank you. It doesn't prevent me from having overarching sense from reading the papers that this seems to be extraordinarily complex. Having said that, it's very important. Zero harm is absolutely critical. But in any event, I'm going to take that concern offline and we can deal with it later. Let's turn now to the zero harm update. So, Lynn, thank you again for the paper. Is there anything you want to add before we get into questions from colleagues? I just had one question.
So no, the only thing I'd say is I do really like the new report structure. And I think like the things that I would tend to like sort of talk to you about, the executive summary leads really nicely to that. So no.
Okay, thank you. Do colleagues have any questions of Lynn about this paper? So thank you. Lynn, I just had one question.
Mm-hmm.
The page 62, the risk reduction timeline.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great innovation. The only question I've got is I'm not quite sure, just by reading the timeline, how you've got to those assessments. So in other words, what measures have you applied to enable you to conclude that the trend is moving in the right direction? Because, you know, clearly the trend is moving in the right direction, which is nice, except I'm not sure how you've measured that.
So Kat, do you want me to jump in and tell the backstory and then you talk about the analysis?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, what we did, so when I came into the business, I was presented with this strategic zero harm risk, right? And I was struck and I got assigned the role of helping support the business review the treatments that were in place for the strategic risk. And I'm quite a detailed person, and I was trying to figure out why we had certain treatments in place for managing the zero harm strategic risk and how we got to deciding that those were the right treatments. So I undertook a piece of work with Kat, and we actually applied bow tie analysis to the strategic risk to figure out whether we actually had all of the treatments that we needed or we should have to manage this risk. So we did that, and we ended up adding additional treatments that weren't articulated in the strategic risk plan. Then we got asked by the committee to say how we were delivering on the strategic risk to move the risk, the residual risk to as low as reasonably practicable, or to drive down our, to our risk appetite. So what we did then, and I believe we've presented it a couple of reports ago, was we analysed each of the treatments and determined how effective they were at managing the risk, and put some, I guess, math behind it. Kat came up with assistance from Debbie and Ross Bartley, a system for almost measuring each of the treatments. Do you want to take over? Do you have anything else to add, Kat?
Thanks, Lynn, through you, Mr. Chair. So the system that was worked out was the effectiveness score, which essentially was provided by Lynn by saying whether it was a very effective treatment, or if it was only moderately effective, or if it was low. And then there was also like a score or an indicator that said whether it was in place, partially in place, or not in place. Our business improvement analysts then took those, applied numeric figures against each of those, and essentially what we end up with is a score against like an overall number. And through that number, then we can see that if we've got a certain amount of the very effective treatments that are in place, highly effective treatments in place, that's obviously working to reduce the the level of risk or residual risk that's left. So as we work through that, we can look at the figures when we get to within where there's only 1 or 2 low effectiveness treatments left to put into place. We understand that then we're, at that line where we're like, okay, we've got 1 or 2 low effectiveness, but essentially all those other ones are so effective that we should be sitting within our risk appetite. And it was presented, I think, that overall, the actual spreadsheet that demonstrates all of the calculations and shows the effectiveness scores and whether things are in place or not in place was presented at the December 2021 meeting. But it can be recirculated. So Lynn updates that spreadsheet every quarter, essentially, to show which ones have been put into place, reviews them briefly to make sure that they are still effective or not effective, or and that punches out a score. Basically, it's quantitative analysis.
Okay, thank you very much. I will go back to the, thank you for your patience. I'll go back to the December 21 paper and refresh my memory. It may well be I've got some questions as a result of that. So thank you for that explanation.
So I guess through you, your chair, through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just add, probably the biggest things that have shifted that risk position since we last met was obviously implementing comply with and having conducted that annual compliance audit, and also having done our internal health and safety audit as well. So they were 2 controls that we hadn't previously implemented.
So that is a live document, and if you're looking backwards on it, it's likely to have old information on it. Commentary will be updated. So, I mean, it could be circulated every quarter, but whether or not the committee needs that level of detail or not, I would suggest that an annual update of that document would be sufficient, and then use the table to track it.
Okay. I suspect Tony and I are going to have a conversation about zero harm anyway offline, so that's fine. I'll have a look at that paper in the meantime. Thank you to the both of you. Right, let's turn now to a paper on strategic communications from Emma. Welcome, Emma. Thanks for your paper. Just before we call on colleagues for any questions, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. I suppose, yeah, I was quite keen to just, kind of frame up the lens I used when I wrote this paper. So I joined council 5.5 months ago. I come off the back of a 22-year career in communications and engagement, and working predominantly across not-for-profit, NGO and government. So my background in the UK, where I'm from originally, was 10 years working for the DWP. Department for Work and Pensions, and in that time I worked on a number of campaigns which were focused on behaviour change and changing attitudes and perceptions, and one of those most chunky ones I worked on was trying to stop people committing benefit fraud, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, was a little bit of an uphill challenge, but I've come to council and I think I'm applying that same lens, and I listen to the conversations that have been had this morning, and a number of conversations I hear in meetings across each and every week that I've been here around how do we change people's perceptions and expectations of council, how do we get them to better understand what it is that we are doing and the success that we are having in these communities, as opposed to them focusing on the negative and that negative narrative constantly being echoed everywhere. So I did have some, so in my sort of discussion points that I've raised, I did have some things I just wanted to use as examples. And I guess just in the interests of time, I'll probably just speak briefly to, so my issue that I raised around we consult, but we don't truly engage with our communities. I believe, this is more about us being, so we do obviously consult, and as part of that consultation process, we do engage, but I'm talking about engagement in the much broader sense and an ongoing engagement, not only reaching out to those communities when we kind of have to because we've got something we need to talk to them about, but talking to them all the time and making sure we're doing it in a plain English kind of way that demystifies council a little bit. So, you know, I don't have a lot of experience, obviously, working in local government, and it's a complex beast. And I think, you know, if you work here and there are things you don't understand, imagine what it's like for the general public. And I was actually in a meeting yesterday, or rather a new starter day, which was quite interesting after 5.5 months, with Councillor Sedgwick. And she raised a point that I've heard many times before, but I think is a point that is worth reinforcing, and that's that the average age that people read at is 12. I've actually heard 9 before as well. So I think, you know, we have to consider that when we communicate to our communities. So yeah, I think what we do right now is very transactional. I think our communications and our engagement approach is in the real transactional space, and we really need to move more to a relational kind of approach. So, you know, we have to recognize the emotion that's in things for people, particularly around decision-making functions. And, you know, when we're speaking to them, we need to be thinking about that. So, you know, really good example, I think, of what I'm talking about here is the dog control bylaw and policy consultation. So, you know, we've communicated well, I believe, to make sure our communities are informed about the proposed amendments, but we didn't, I don't believe, really offer them an opportunity to engage in the discussion before we reached that point, knowing that, you know, it's an incredibly emotive thing, people and their dogs. So could we have approached that differently to give them an opportunity to comment, you know, and to feel like they had some kind of input into our thinking? I think we probably could have done. And I understand that this is something that we have done in other cases, such as speed bylaw policy. So a perfect example of how I think we could do this is Wellington City Council are currently running a campaign where they're seeking views from residents on their draft open spaces strategy, which actually goes out for consultation later this year. But at the moment, they're kind of doing the pre piece, and they're actually running it as a really engaging marketing campaign, and they're calling it "Tell Us About Your Happy Place." So, you know, they're really appealing to that kind of hearts and minds piece with people, and I think we should be doing a lot more of that to get the outcomes that we want. So yeah, I suppose I just probably wanted to highlight that there. Also, in my point about council's brand, you know, all of the things I discuss in this paper contribute to the way that people feel about brand Waikato District Council. Every interaction that we're having with people has the potential impact, you know, has the potential to impact on their positive or negative perception of us as a council. You know, and I think we all need to, all of us, every single one of us needs to strive to protect our brand and reputation wherever possible, and also enhance it where that's possible. So, you know, I think about reputation management, and I'm sure Jan has got lots of thoughts on this given her previous career. I think about reputation management as kind of a continuous pendulum between building the reputation, maintaining it, and rebuilding it. But clearly there are some people who do this brilliantly, and they not only maintain their reputation, but they leverage off their reputation. So, you know, I believe if we conduct ourselves a lot more strategically in this space, we have a plan and we're consistent in our execution of that, then we can be in that space too. So yeah, very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Emma. And I think that, you know, one of the benefit of having someone like you with coming from a diverse background, different culture, but bringing cold eyes, but with the same degree of expertise, means that we get an almost unique opportunity for someone to look in and identify areas for possible change. I'm going to go to Councillor Sedgwick first, and then at some point I'm just going to come back, Tony, just to get a sense from you as to how the ELT proposes to pick up some of the issues that are traversed in Emma's paper. Councillor Sedgwick.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, you actually echoed some of the thoughts that I had, which is I always like it when people do 2 months into the job, 6 months into the job, whatever it is. It just brings a freshness that we can't buy and we seldom capture. And I think that's excellent. So thank you, Emma. I agree. Of course, I agree with pretty much everything that you've said. I think one of the elements that we struggle with is there is an inherent lack of trust in the community for anything the council does. And so even when we put out good news, it tends to get hijacked, and increasingly so on social media with the, yeah, but why don't you do X, Y, Z? I think that we're moving in the right direction, and I'm really pleased to see that. And I think Councillor Gibb can probably talk about having been involved in pre-consultation. I think there's also an education program in terms of what precisely is consultation, and consultation is not done after the hearing and before the deliberation, which is where people seem to think that it comes in. So look, I agree with where you're going. I like your report. Thank you for doing it. I like your insights, and I think there are areas where we can do great stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks, Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess it's more commentary in a sense. I find it very hard to disagree with anything that's in here. Unlike Councillor Sedgwick, this is not my forte or my background, but it's very difficult to argue with your conclusions. And it echoes comments we've made for some time. I guess I still think of myself as a relative outsider too, although somehow 6 years have gone by. It seems to me that there are a number of things we have to consult on, and nobody really cares. So let's be honest about that and actually advertise that as, look, if you're really interested, here it is. But let's not clutter the general public, I guess, with that, but actually then talk about the stuff which we know touches them, which we know is important and they care about, and make a fuss about those. And for me, I think your last point around community boards and committees, for me, actually represents the lowest hanging fruit. Eventually, I guess every resident and ratepayer will, in their own way, be empowered and feel like they can talk to us directly. But it's a journey to get there. In the short term, community boards and committees represent, I think, our easiest channel to that next level of nuance and detail. And it's also an efficient way for us to talk to a group of people who already have put their hands up to be engaged, more so than their fellow residents. So I really endorse the sentiment here, and really hope that that the organisation gives it the priority and resources, because you'll have to compete for time and attention, along with all the other pressing issues. I really think that if anything comes out of this meeting today, it's probably that there's an endorsement from this committee and elected members to give this priority.
Thanks, Councillor Beck. Well said. Councillor Church.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, everyone's basically on the same pages. Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. 2 parts. Just going on along with the last point around the community boards and committees, and I guess I come to mind, there was a stat in another paper yesterday, I think it was, that we're still 65% rural, and we don't always therefore pick up a lot of those other communities. And we've talked a lot about, I personally think it's a small database of, you've got 6 community boards, possibly 7 with representation, I think to count. You've got authorised community committees like Tamahiri, Te Kauwhata, Pocono, etc. You've got another level of really active resident ratepayer committees, call them that. And then you've got a lot of hall committees. Now there's only 34 halls, so again, it's quite a small, unique group. But even the Heritage Forum is another unique group that we, Federated Farmers or whatever, there's some key stakeholders that we engage with all the time that are using our facilities and to a large degree. I personally think that and also having that network of communication that you're talking about a little bit broader, and asking of those people, which you're already engaging with, do you want this extra information from us? That would be just a broader stroke. Coming back to the brand, because I agree that whole brand management, expectations, a lot comes into that brand, and how they create it or redo it. And I say this with love. Every new marketing person wants to recreate and change it, to put their stamp on it. And I know you're not on that page that I can see. But what I would like is a kind of an example. You say it's fractured and inconsistently applied. Can you give us a couple of quick examples of what you mean by that, and what you can big top of the line concerns are around that?
Yes, through the chair. I suppose off the top of my head, I was having a conversation with one of our planners, and she said, how do we apply brand when we produce all of these different booklets and all of these different documents? And she said, if I got a load out in front of you today, they'd all look different. So that's a really simplistic example of how we show up, not only in the community, but with our stakeholders and our partners. And, it's got to be consistent. They've got to, there's so much, and this, I know, and obviously Councillor Sedgwick with her, PR background knows how important it is for that consistency and brand to, infer trust and confidence and so many other things. When people see it, they're like, oh, okay, that's Waikato District Council. So it's a real simplistic example, but that is an example of what I mean. And, internally, certainly in a number of the conversations I've had, people are unclear about what they're supposed to be doing. And in that particular conversation, I said to her, look, I'm not a planner, but I also don't expect you to be a marketer or to understand brand. And that's where our team need to support better. We need to put in place the guidelines for people. We need to be able to help them to be able to apply that brand correctly and consistently. And that is from my understanding, obviously that hasn't been happening in the past. So it's actually a real simple fix, that one. But that's an example of what I mean.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Church, anything else you wanted to graze before we go to Councillor Gibb?
So you're saying that Waikato District Council, I've created some in the past, that's why I'm asking the question. You're saying that Waikato District Council doesn't have a brand specification manual? We do, Councillor Church. I'm sorry, through the chair, we do, but it's out of date and it needs updating. And we've so a bit of a refresh of the brand started before I came to council. It's not actually complete yet. It's been ongoing for quite some time. So I'm trying to kind of wrap that up. And it's really just a refresh in application. So offering us some more opportunities. Our brand colour palette is quite limited, so black, yellow and red is quite hard to work with, certainly from an accessibility perspective and using it on digital platforms. So we're just trying to work through some of that stuff. So we do have one, Councillor Church, but it's out of date. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gibb.
Yes, thanks through the chair. I just want to say thank you, Emma, for the paper. And I think it's something that as our other councillors, fellow councillors, even though they have access to this agenda, may not read unless we highlight it. And I think it's worth a conversation with everybody. One thing I really like is what you said about continually having conversations outside of our legislative consultation requirements. And as councillors, I think that falls back on us a lot to keep doing that within our unique communities within the council district. And something that I've been told is people like to hear us tell them things or tell them a story, even if they don't agree with it. And I think it's hard for councillors who get knocked a bit and staff who get knocked a bit, especially in the social media platform. But I think we can't give up, and we just have to keep telling the story and telling the facts. So not all of the councillors do that. So I can see that we could have some training. Councillor Sedgwick could possibly lead the charge and train us. We need some training and be a lot more consistent across all the wards. But I really liked your paper and I like the highlights in there. Another point about the community boards, I think we need to put some resource into their understanding as well, because some of my experiences over these 9 years is that community boards think that often, not all the time, often think that they need to hold us to account and that they're the auditors of the council, whereas I thought we were working as a team, the boards, the councillors, the staff, the management. So if we can somehow concentrate on those community boards and get their attitudes changed, that's another, like you said, they're another touch point and another source of communication to the rest of our community. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Emma. It's a really good paper.
Thank you, Councillor Gibb. Just what I would say is that local government, as I'm sure you've quickly worked out, Emma, is a very tough gig. You're at the zenith now of your popularity and influence, and my recommendation is that you move very fast. And on that note, Tony, maybe you could give us some thoughts as to the ELT's response to Emma's paper and your sense as to what should happen next.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, I guess certainly from my perspective, it's great to hear the sentiment coming from the councillors this morning. So ELT have already supported Emma. So we have the show on the road. So we have supported a new structure for Emma, which includes additional resource. And so we're now in the process of essentially engaging or consulting with affected parties in her team and moving forward in that way. So absolutely, ELT sound like we are totally aligned with the group of councillors on this call here. We very much agree that we need to move the story to be more proactive rather than reactive, and we need to get Emma. So Emma's been here, as she said, 5.5 months, but she is still, having done the stock take, is still needing to work in the business way too much. And so it's about getting the resources and getting the structure in place, and that structure includes some of the sentiment that she's raised this morning around getting the sort of demarcation lines, if you like, within the team between sort of communications advisors and proactive advisors, but that whole engagement space. So we're like pretty optimistic, Mr. Chairman. So we certainly like what we see with Emma and the stock take that she's done and the vision and our way forward. And I think it is actually bringing together a number of stories that, you know, as an exec and with councillors we've had over many years. So having a communications specialist amongst us from an exec perspective is really getting us to think, you know, like a bit more proactively. And so that's why ELT have supported her proposal to invest, you know, and it's about 30% more a resource in that team to move us in this direction. So we're pretty confident that by getting some of this proactivity, it will reduce a lot of noise and actually give us that return on investment.
Thank you, Tony. I'll go to His Worship in just a moment. In fact, I'll go to His Worship now.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. Hey, look, great paper, Emma. You know, it's the mayor. You're the only one within the organisation that is elected at large, and as part of that, I've always taken on, as did the previous mayor, took on the mantle of being the true custodian to the brand, and I've referred to that many, many times as being that custodian to protect the brand. And look, and I do agree. We started refreshing, and probably we I don't know whether we ran out of steam or quite what we did, but we never sort of carried on. And until it's brought to my attention, I never looked behind my shoulders to see whether we completed it or not. But I've got to say that, you know, in all reality, it's great, this conversation here this morning. But I will remind you all, and I've seen examples of that through work we've done the last couple of weeks, is we have across New Zealand society, not only in the Waikato district, God, I would think we didn't have mayor, but we have what I call the 1%ers. And you'll never impact on the 1%ers. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to react too much and give too much airtime to the 1%ers. So it's just a warning to everybody that just because somebody's standing on the soapbox, it doesn't mean there's the other 85,000 people behind them. But we have a tendency to only listen to one course. And so I just remind everybody of that too.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Tony, as we've previously looked at the strategic risk register, and as I think someone's previously noted, reputation is one of our key risks from a strategic risk perspective, and therefore it is something that this committee is very much involved in. I think it would be useful to schedule at an appropriate time a follow-up report back from Emma, just to see how things are going. Good. Okay. So let's turn now to the next item, and thank you, Emma. Much appreciated and good luck.
Thank you.
We talked earlier this morning about the benefits of audits, and consistent with audits and evaluations is the next paper, which reflects a change we made to the terms of reference, which is to really hold up a mirror to this committee with a view to seeing whether we could do better. So with that in mind, Tony and I were tasked to talk with KPMG, which we did. The result of that is Tony's paper. I'll just get Tony to add anything he wants to add, but fundamentally, you'll see the recommendations there are that we undertake a 360-degree review, not just with the committee, but also with committee members and senior staff and Audit New Zealand staff, that we ask KPMG to come in and observe a meeting to provide recommendations about effectiveness. And then Tony and I are looking to see if we can reach out to folks who are in the similar game to see whether there are any best practice ideas that we can nick for use within this committee. So, Tony, before we go to colleagues for comments or questions, did you want to add anything?
Well, only the fact, Mr. Chair, that I did reach out to the Chief Executive of LAS or CoLab yesterday to see whether that third point that you reference around the sort of regional opportunity around a workshop might be something that LAS or CoLab could support. But yeah, happy to take the paper as read.
Thank you. I'm sure the chair of CoLab would be disappointed if you didn't get a positive response to that, Tony. Okay, so do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions? Good, excellent. My sense is that we should just get on and execute this now, for the reasons being that it's a great opportunity to undertake a baseline. I'm reminded of my days at a very, very, very large law firm where there were annual medicals that were introduced. For those of you who know lawyers, you'll know that partners in large law firms fundamentally are egotistical maniacs, and that was certainly true. And a number of partners were very keen not to participate in the annual medical until they felt that they were fit enough, which kind of ruined the point, but classic lawyer behaviour. So my thinking is that we should go and just get a baseline, as we've talked about before in relation to the benefits of audits. As the wisest chairman I ever worked for once said to me, if we ask ourselves hard questions, we've got nothing to fear from anyone else. And I think that's fundamentally what we're going to do here. So hopefully we'll get good feedback, not only from committee members, but also from our colleagues at the council who are participating in these kind of conversations. Good, thank you. Let's move on then.
Sorry, through the chair. There's actually resolutions there, Mr. Chair.
You're absolutely right, Galen. I've just picked up my pieces of paper, and thank you for being so quick to remind me. So we've got some recommendations that we approve, the feedback survey, the annual observation, and Tony and I participating in regional meetings, and that we approve the committee evaluation questionnaire. Thanks, Galen. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Gibb. Everyone comfortable with that approach? Wonderful. Thank you. And thanks again, Galen. Let's turn now to the reports that are taken as read. They are the Equality and Governance Assurance, the Insurance Policy Premium Confirmation, the updated Future Work Plan, and then we'll go to the Register of Interest. So dealing first with the Quality and Governance Assurance paper, which is by Madalena. Does anyone want to talk to this paper before we go to questions?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's really just from a staff perspective, happy to take it as read.
Thank you very much. Do colleagues have any questions about the paper? I just had one question, Tony. I was really interested, this is page 80, to hear about an innovation and ideas forum. Fundamentally, my view has been that risk and return are two sides of the same coin, and they're fundamental pillars of a capitalist society. I'm very interested in understanding a little bit more about the work of the forum, and I wonder whether at an appropriate time we could possibly persuade the forum to give us a presentation on the work that they're doing, because as I say, it's the flip side of risk. It sounds like Councillor Church, you were probably about to suggest the same thing.
So I think through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, that would be great, that we can show that forum that this committee is interested. So I think that would be a great outcome.
Great. If colleagues are happy with that, I'm certainly be very keen to hear. These are challenging times for a local government, and any opportunity to showcase innovative thinking, I think will meet with a good response, both within the community and equally importantly at national government level. Now, I'm sorry, Councillor Church, was there a particular question you wanted to raise? You've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Yeah, no, I look forward to that presentation. I think it would be a good innovation. We've got to be nimble and agile and learn from more heads. My question is really at the bottom of page 80 is around the table, which I love. It's good, but I just note with the work in progress is cybersecurity primarily, but also information recording, which I don't think seems to be as high risk area. But we talk a lot about cyber risk and security, and also the escalation later on in the papers around those issues. And we know that that's like, it's almost like a cyber pandemic, it seems to me, with my limited knowledge of the area. So I guess my concern is around the timing of those 8 outstanding work in progress issues. And with security, so I'm happy to talk about later, but just highlighting that as a concern.
Councillor Church, I'm equally keen to talk about cybersecurity. I'm conscious of the fact that we've got a cybersecurity paper in the public excluded agenda, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have an open conversation there during that section, because I think the point you raise is a really, really good one, and it's one that I wanted to delve into a little bit as well. So if you don't mind, we'll park that for later on the agenda. Thank you. All right, folks, so let's move now to the insurance policy and premium confirmation. This is reasonably eye-watering stuff in terms of the hardness of the insurance market. And your point, Councillor Church, in relation to cybersecurity is well made in that context. Alison, was there anything in particular that you wanted to say? I thought the paper was good, and attaching the paper from Aon was very helpful in terms of giving a bit more context to the state of the market at the moment. Was there anything you wanted to say before we move to Councillor Beck's question?
No, just an apology about the really dark blue. That's hard to read what the policies actually are. So apologies for the readability of the attachment.
Probably best kept in the dark anyway, given the increases in the premium. Councillor Beck.
Yes, to that point, that wasn't the bit I found hardest to read, Alison. Were the hardest bit to read, but anyway, crystal clear though that they were. I'm just wondering to what extent we have, as an organisation, investigated or done some modelling around self-insuring. I know that there are, points at which, vehicles is a classic one that corporates will look at if the fleet is large enough. But for us, it may not be vehicles; it may be something else. I know we have different policies around halls and community facilities, for example, versus, sort of more directly used council buildings. But I'm just wondering whether a way to lessen our premium paid, doesn't mean you end up paying less in the long run, of course, but of basically, self-insuring as opposed to having a cover on something.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we did do a piece of work at the end, I think it was in the last quarter of 2021, where, or might have been the third quarter, where we did actually sit down with Aon and go through where could we, from a strategy perspective, be looking at different mechanisms. I guess the thing in terms of self-insurance, we do have some aspects to that. So if you think about, so for example, if we have a storm damage event, etc., then we have to have an element of cover ourselves anyway. And so we do things like build up reserves over time. So I guess self-insurance, so yes, we could do that piece of work. I'm not sure that for $1 million, if something happened, certainly in that professional indemnity, public liability space, we couldn't self-insure. Those are very expensive processes. But on the material damage side of things, the business managers do look at their work program. They look at what types of replacement stuff might be required, and they say if it's 10,000 or less, there's absolutely no point putting it in the insurance program because the excess is such that, yeah. So there's that level, but it really would require us to come up with some additional funding, I guess, via ratepayers. I think your premiums, your insurance cover. Yeah. So yes, there's a piece of work that we can do there. We haven't done it.
I guess to sharpen my focus, I was talking about assets rather than general liabilities specifically here.
Yeah.
But look, I'm happy just to leave it there. It's nice to know you've looked at it, and I guess as there's continual upwards pressure on premiums, that we need to keep having a broad view on the best way in which to ensure sustainability.
Yeah, so some of the mechanisms that we'll be looking at through, say, our climate change, etc., putting in place things that actually make our assets more resilient in the planning phase is actually probably the preference for spending your money there rather than the insurance space in terms of self-insurance. So actually get the planning, get the resilience in your infrastructure to start with. And
but and here's the but, having done that and done it consciously, and it's a good strategy, then remembering that when we come to actually look at our insurance policy and not just automatically adding it in with everything else, because actually we've dealt with the risk in a different way.
Absolutely.
Tony, you had a point.
So just to reinforce, Mr. Chair, so I guess we have done that piece of work to determine what the more significant risks are, and I guess we are using, as Alison said, the level of the excess to be a portion of our self-assurance or self-insurance. And I guess what we could do is continue to challenge that so that we've still got cover in place for the big event, but we're doing a degree of self-management. And I think the other comment that Councillor Beck made around the vehicles, my understanding is that we do have a vehicle insurance policy that does provide you with some return in the event that you've got good history. So it's a less insurance contract, but good driver behaviour or lower accidents does actually mean that our premiums are lower as well.
Good, excellent, thank you. Thank you both. Let's turn then to the future work plan. Does anyone have any questions about that? I just had two. No, so just while we're waiting, Tony, do we think we've got a good shot of fitting in a zero harm site visit for June, or do you want to kick this down to September?
So happy to leave it there in the interim, Mr. Chairman. I guess, yeah, if our world changes, hopefully, we do have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. And then the second question was, to the right-hand side, there's a suite of bullet points saying to be confirmed: community expectations, cybersecurity, economic and social development, legislative reform. Can you just tell me, just to help me understand, what those 4 bullet points are a reference to?
So those are just around the strategic risk deep dives, Mr. Chairman. So that's really, so what we're trying to do is to have a program of deep dives that actually reference back to our strategic risks. So what we'll do is we'll probably, with the work that we're doing around the revisiting our mitigations that Kelly referred to earlier. We probably now, with our new strategic risk register, will look at that again.
For the purposes of fitting it into a future year agenda.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Right. And no one else? Good, thank you. Let's move now to the Register of Interests. And this is fundamentally that the Register of Interests for elected and appointed members be received. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, good. I think, Gayleen, with your permission, we are now at the end of the open section of the agenda. Have I got that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you just need to move item 8, which is the exclusion of the public resolution.
Yep, even I'd worked that out. That's great, thank you. So I move now that the committee exclude the public for the following parts of the proceedings of the meeting in terms of those items that are referred to in the papers in reliance on the sections of the Local Government and Official Information and Meetings Act that are also referred to in the papers. And I also move that Katerina, and I'm not sure whether Clarence is with us. I suspect it's just Katerina from Audit New Zealand.
Yep.
Oh, you are here, Clarence?
Yes, I am.
Welcome, thank you. And so that Katerina and Clarence from Audit New Zealand be permitted to remain.